Alright guys, such comic again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Spicy clip emerging last night. Shotzzy looking back at the disastrous season that OpTic had, and when they lost to the Falcons, that was arguably the lowest point in many respects of their entire season after the 0-18 run had already concluded. Shotzzy says he reckons tongue-in-cheek, but he's like, look, you try and play him with Caesar Skyz Bueno and see how you would get on. Then he says, okay, no, I'm just joking or whatever, but still interesting to look back on the fact that, yeah, Skyz was dropped and all of a sudden they're winning the World Championship. Will Skyz get back in the league next season? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. FeLo tweeted out yesterday, when it rains it pours. Obviously a difficult time for him right now because he played for Gentlemates this year, came in, did a respectable job I thought. You know, it wasn't great, the entire team was terrible, let's be real, and now he's been dropped for Diamond Con. So it's tough scenes, obviously similar story for Priester. There are a number of players now who, you know, their time in the league may be done, we'll see. With expansion, maybe a different story, but, you know, I wonder where next for FeLo, right? Does he go back down to challenges and keep dominating, right? It's absolutely plausible. Start bringing up some younger talents again. We'll see what next season holds. Black Ops 7 is hopefully going to be a better game than we've had. Well, this game was okay. Just the maps are atrocious. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. This was a list that Attach and Donny Temp put together yesterday on their top 30 players ever, based purely on talent. Now, this is a very interesting and difficult conversation, and I'm sure that you guys are going to have all sorts of thoughts about this in the comment section below. So we will go through it. Now, in terms of best COD player ever or greatest COD player ever, that considers talent and it considers skill, but it also considers accolades to a great degree, and maybe also includes to some degree impact on the sport. If I'm thinking the greatest player ever, you know, Scump definitely has some of Scump's position on that list is because of what he was to COD, I think, to some degree. Now, you can analyse it in a million different ways, and doing so over eras becomes very challenging, but most people would agree that the top 10 Call of Duty players of all time, in a rough order, are something like Kremp, Scump, Karma, Clay, Formal, Simp is probably there now. You could argue maybe Kenny is there now as well, and then Aches, JCap, you know, among others, right? So that's roughly speaking kind of like a top 10 in some order or another for all-time COD players list. But maybe you want to say in terms of talent, then the conversation is a little different. And I think the guys actually mentioned that if they're talking pure talent, now this is gun skill plus movement plus, you know, positioning and all these other factors, then Shotzzy and HyDra might just be the best, like, or they might be right up there, like top 2, top 3 bare minimum. But if we're talking just purely gun skill, then it's a different convo. So I wanted to clarify, that's what they're talking about here. They're talking pure gunny, right? Like talent at snapping onto someone and taking them down. That's how they're ordering this list. And therefore, of course, it's going to get pretty controversial and fast. So they've gone Scump number 1, Formal number 2, Simp number 3, HyDra 4th, Dashy 5th. I think that, you know, that list, the top 5 there, is not bad. Like, I know that people would say maybe Dashy should be higher, maybe Dashy could be 3rd, above Simp and HyDra, possibly. It's very, very difficult to argue between these. I think really what I find more interesting is maybe some of the more controversial picks as to where they put certain players. Scrap down in 12 is interesting. I think that's understandable and it's justified. I think if we come back to this list in a couple of years, Scrap's going to end up higher than this. I think Scrap's gun skill is actually a little underrated. But could I put Scrap above Kremp? It's interesting for Kremp, for example, because in the early days, the guy was just unbelievably godlike. You know, would just not miss a bullet. Obviously, in the last couple of years of his career, he wasn't considered to be the most mechanically dominant player. But I don't know, I think Kremp at 11th feels a little bit harsh, but then again, if you're doing it purely based on gun skill, then, you know, over their careers was maybe Octane. Like, Octane's gunny is also so good and maybe honestly kind of underrated. I think Octane's gunny is pretty underrated just because he used to use such a high sensitivity, which I think is relevant there. I'll also say that Gunless maybe, I don't know, like I might be throwing Gunless in my top 10. There's a number of players that I'd love to throw in the top 10. Of course, Attach and Temp did this list, so they put themselves here. maybe Temp at 19, Attached at 16 feels a bit overrated for them. You can give your opinion on that if you like. CleanX at 17, Zoomer up at 13 is interesting. Some would say that's overrated, some would say that's underrated. It's a very difficult thing to do. Probably the most controversial thing here comes around the mid-20s, I would say. Because, first of all, I think aBeZy, I would like to put him higher than this. I really would. And I think you can definitely justify that. aBeZy was like really impressive. Now, he was very hot and cold as a player, to be fair, so maybe that's been taken into account to some degree. And I guess if you're putting aBeZy higher, you kind of have to put John higher as well. I don't know. But they've gone Sib, Eggs, Envoy, Drazah, Saint. I mean, Saint's another really good shout here. Happy that he at least made the list. Incredible talent in his day. The other big one, though, of course, is Karma, right? That's what everyone's talking about. Karma sitting down here at 24th, because that's probably the biggest difference, apart from maybe Eggs, I guess, between where players are in the all-time rankings and where they are in this gunny rankings. Even Eggs can probably be higher than this, to be honest, but to be fair, at the end of his career, he was a bit of a burger. So, maybe if you're talking prime gunny, yeah, man, the conversation gets even more complicated. But yeah, it's interesting for Karma. Look, was he ever considered the most dominant individual, ability, like pure gun skill player? Not necessarily, but I mean, I think definitely in his day, Karma is getting overlooked on this list to some degree. The fact that he's kind of unanimously at least top 3 all time from anyone from like a greatest player perspective, to be 24th on the gun skill list feels a bit harsh. But yeah, definitely intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Some players, of course, that people would say that were missed. There was quite a lot of replies to it on social media. TJ says this list is horrendous, probably because he's not on there. But Temp says you're on my personal list for sure. So obviously it's going to be a big debate, isn't it, between the community. There was also kind of a nice shout to see some of the players back in the day. I thought it was an interesting shout to talk about Proofy, maybe, and some of the real OGs. Because Proofy, especially as one of the like original OG players, considered to have unbelievable raw aim. And yeah, to throw Proofy on here, I think would be kind of nice to see as well. But even Karma was in the replies. This was the tweet. They went to the gym, they got some food, and then they did their list. And Karma was in the reply saying must have drank before this one. So I think that may have been in reaction to the list that we eventually saw. And Don thought that was pretty funny. And Abel says at least you made the list. So yeah, Karma was clearly talking about the list anyway. Don put himself over you. So pretty funny. I should have got a 2x bonus for doing it with enough. Anyway, it's a very controversial one. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. You could run this list a million different ways and nothing would be correct. Maybe nothing would be wrong. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments. The other thing I want to get into though is this OpTic stuff, because it's been such an amazing season to look back on. I mean, I was looking back as a result of some of this drama on some of the stat lines for the matches this season, and I really was having a hard time believing that OpTic won champs in the same season that some of these stat lines were being thrown up. Now, yeah, Kenny dropped the 0.3 and was dropped, or left, right? Maybe it wasn't dropped before he was pushed or whatever, like left before he was pushed. You know what I'm saying? But this was a pretty funny clip. So Shotzzy was reacting to their game against the Falcons. This is, a few months ago now. We'll see it. And just some of the reaction in the replies. I mean, I remember, wow, like that was a crazy time, right? OpTic fans were crashing out, like for very good reason, right? It was totally justified that OpTic fans are crashing out. Shotzzy had like a 0.7 in this series. And this was really the time where so much of the community attention was falling to Shotzzy because, some changes had been made. Shotzzy had talked all this trash and it was clearly backfiring massively. Pred then got revenge in this series. But Shotzzy says towards the end of this clip, he's like, look, well, you can't blame me for losing. I was playing with Caesar. Now, look, obviously this was, on some level, it's a joke. He's not trying to trash Skyz for no reason at all. And let's not forget here, he wanted to keep Skyz. After Major 3, when Mercules became available, he wanted to keep Skyz because he wanted the roster not to change and make another move. But I think, he recognized that the team with Skyz wasn't very good. It's just that he was hopeful they could do a bit more with that roster than they'd previously done. And he was at least optimistic that maybe making another change was not the way to go at this point. And he was hate watching Mercules. Shotzzy literally said it on stream that he was hate watching Mercules at Major 3, so he didn't have to make a change. Then it became kind of clear that, they needed Mercules, and they got him, and the rest is history. So yeah, I wouldn't read into this too much, but it is just pretty funny that Shotzzy says it and then kind of like backs out of it, right? But I don't know. I have a hard time believing that on some level Shotzzy doesn't kind of believe what he's saying here.
And that
yeah, look like I'm gonna cry.
They will never forget. Vegas, their first.
Bro, I wonder if they catch all this shit in the process, bro. Because I don't remember cameras being around me, dude. I'm not gonna lie. Maybe I was so in the moment. It looked like he just saw a ghost. Yo, he said he just became aware that there is no one else to blame. You see, bro. Yeah, you try to play with Caesar. No, I'm trolling. I'm trolling.
So this was that series, right? And as I say, this was on the 12th of April, right? So not that long. In the grand scheme of things, just to think about it, it was the end of June that they won champs. So we're talking 2.5 months from this to winning champs. And, well, this was the series in question. It was, I mean, I'm sure the comments on this are pretty, Shotzzy with a 0.77. Precisely. So this was the series. Falcons at this point had not won anything. This was their win off the stage. And in the end, OpTic, didn't have a disastrous time, but they did lose to the Falcons. Obviously, Pred wanted the win. But look at this scoreboard. Arcetes, 1.21. Exnid, 0.93, but making plays. Priester, 1.16. Like, those ARs had an awful time on Falcons this year, but this series, they were dropping 1.2s. Pred had a 1.1. Dashy had a 1.1. Huke, 0.94 with, like, no damage. Skyz at the 0.87. And Shotzzy with a 0.77, right? So, just remarkable turn of events, let's be honest, that OpTic went from this losing to the Falcons to this series. I mean, this was a series on the 27th of June when they 3-0'd FaZe and Dashy was about even. Huke has a 1.3, Shotzzy has a 1.1, Mercules has a 1.5, and Drazah and Simp are averaging out a 0.7, right? Like, it's... yeah, what a crazy season. And if you look back at OpTic's run, I mean, I don't want to say the Falcons was the worst it got, because it wasn't, obviously, right? Like, it was worse back here. This was their Major 2 run, Major 1 tournament, Major 2 qualifiers, all the matches they lost in a row, finally beat the Gentlemates, turned up to the Minor, beat Falcons there, then lost to Ultra, beat Rocker at the Major, lost to Ultra. Then the Major 3 qualifiers, they'd beaten Rocker, they'd beaten Cloud9, and then they lost to Heretics, Falcons, and FaZe back to back to back. And, the Falcon series was bad. The FaZe series was bad as well. This is on the 20th of April, of course. And then shortly after this, they decided to make the move. This was, Dashy had a 1.2 this series, and they lost it in 4 in the end. It was actually a pretty close affair, this one. OpTic looked like they're making a little bit of progress. They, of course, beat Falcons, got their revenge at the Major. And then they decided to make the call and bring in Mercules, right? So just pretty interesting. I know that it was causing a lot of reaction, right? I mean, this guy, obviously he's doing a bit of rage baiting, isn't he, really? But he says, Botsy is the worst player on OpTic. People clamored about his 1.2 on Surge of Fed, and he just matches up with them very well. As for the clip, it's funny that he's now saying that when him and Dashy were the most hellbent on sticking with Skyz when Hex and Methods wanted Merc, which, is actually the point that I made earlier, right? That, Shotzzy said that he wanted to keep Skyz. So, like, take it as you will. I thought it was pretty funny at the end of the day, but I'm also pretty hopeful that Skyz could get another opportunity. Like, I think it's been an interesting couple of years for Skyz after winning champs in 2023. Last year's New York team, I mean, you remember how critical Shotzzy was of Skyz? What was it? They played on Invasion. It was like an Invasion surge, and Shotzzy turned and was like, what was this clown even doing? Or something like that anyway. I don't think he said clown, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there was that moment anyway between OpTic and New York in the Champs Grand Finals, where, of course, Skyz goes down, but he made 2 back-to-back Champs Finals. And I do think Skyz, pretty underrated player generally in his career. Like, back in the day, teams like LG, even the Florida days, he was really good. And I think we can still see that a bit from Skyz. I just don't really think this game at all suited his style. And I think that's pretty much what Shotzzy's getting at, is to say, well, yeah, if you play with a guy like Skyz, to use Shotzzy's terminology, maybe his efficiency was not quite up to par. So very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.